Coming to the first panel of the day on a Sunday. Come on in and scoot forward. We promise that most of us don't bite and the rest of us have had our shots. We asked nicely, so come on, scoot forward and we won't have to shout so much. I am Kathy Plesko. I am a computational geophysicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where I study asteroids and comets and other rocks in space and what happens when they hit each other or a planet and how to stop them from hitting our favorite planet. And so let's...
Mars? Yes.
I like it when it hits Mars. I really like that. So I'm going to send the mic up and down the road and let everyone introduce themselves.
My name's David Lee Summers, and by day I write science fiction and horror and steampunk, and these are a couple of recent titles. This one is Kepler's Dozen, which is an anthology that I edited with Steve Howell, who is the head of astronomy and astrobiology at NASA Ames, and these are stories of science fiction stories set around planets discovered by the Kepler space mission. And this is another recent book, which is The Astronomer's Crypt, which is my story, kind of my nightmare vision of what I do by night, which is operate telescopes at Kitt Peak National Observatory. So I work both, I kind of work both sides of the street, talking about science in fiction and actually helping people get good science.
So I'm a more traditional route where I work during the day at Los Alamos National Laboratory, national security stuff, but also more fun lasers and metamaterials. At night, I try to write in my copious free time. Most recently, Post-Apocalyptic Tourist Guide to Santa Fe and Los Alamos. Anyway, I have a PhD in electrical engineering, although most of my work is actually physics.
Hi, I'm Kathy Kitts, and my research was cosmic chemistry, lunar materials, meteorites, solar wind. My mission that I was a part of, science mission, was Genesis. We now got solar wind, brought it back. Some of you have already heard that story. It ends well, but there was a little part that was sad because NASA first said it's a non-nominal re-entry. We refer to it as SPLAT. The altitude sensor was put upside down by JPL, and it never deployed the rogue chute. But we still got our data out of it, so it's still considered officially a positive in NASA's record. So that's what we care about.
Well, I guess I'm the only non-scientist on this panel, which is a little nerve-wracking, but my name is Greg Butler. I am a cloud infrastructure engineer. I build interpipes for web applications, primarily for the federal government. Right now, I'm working on the new version of VAgov, so if any of you out there are veterans, go check out preview.va.gov to see what we're going to be bringing to all of you. And so I guess I'm here to bring a, technological perspective or something.
So the topic today is the shifting view of science, and the concept for the panel was, all right, back 50 years ago when Bubonicon was starting out and we were in the golden age of science fiction, where we had all sorts of sci-fi coming out of the movies and lots of magazines and everything's being published, and there was a lot of hard sci-fi coming out and a strong desire for it. What has changed between then and now with the proposal that maybe science isn't quite as popular or as well regarded as it used to be back in the day. And so I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, admittedly I wasn't there at the time, so I don't have a good feel for what things were like then. I don't know, I kind of wonder if maybe there's some sort of grass was greener sort of thing going on there? Nope. Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, well, two Kathys are going to debate this one then. Awesome. So, I was thinking as I was putting on my Science as a Verb Now t-shirt and my planet socks that you can't see because we're sitting behind a tablecloth here, that, I feel like things are pretty cool. I feel like when I go to a party and, what do you do? Oh, yeah, I'm not really an astronomer, but, rocks in space. Oh, nice. So I feel like I'm getting some respect there. I will admit that it's interesting to see the opinion polls in the US where far more people believe that in their lifetime they are likely to see the second coming of Jesus Christ, then are likely to see an asteroid strike the Earth. That poll was taken in 2010, 3 years before the impact of the Chelyabinsk meteorite into Russia. So I'm not sure if the poll had a size cutoff there, if they were thinking KT impact, which, yeah, okay, I'd spot on that. But it's interesting to see those sorts of opinions combined with record attendance at cons and all sorts of other hilarious debates going on. So, other Kathy?
Oh, sure.
Go for it.
I'm old, retired, and so I was in the day when, I was a child, and there was Bell Labs and all these sorts of things where everyone thought science was great. So right now, what I'm seeing the difference is it's social media, that you'd rather listen to your best bud, the guy who has an electric in his hot tub, and things like that, than you would. So for example, if your buddy can tell you that vaccines are bad, you believe him. But if you say something like, well, because they can't calculate when let me start over. I'm not saying this badly. I think that where it really boils down to is that there's a loss of faith in scientists and what we calculate, which is really ironic because, for example, people were coming to me all over the place. Where should I go for the eclipse? Where can I do? They completely trusted me on the eclipse. But if I say something like, you should have your kid vaccinated, you're just another evil corporation. So why is it that I can calculate where the eclipse is, but I can't figure out anything else about science? And I really think it comes down to social media, which wasn't so. Before, people would always believe their friends above some person out there. And I believe we've also done ourselves a disservice because it's the evil scientist, right, and the stories. And that changes. We're improving that. But again, we're talking to the choir. We're singing to the choir here. Everyone here is pro-science, and if you live in that bubble. But I've had people who have attacked me because I was in the geology department. They would send missionaries to come and save us because Earth was really only 6,000 years old. And I didn't have that when I was younger. The last 5 years of my career, they would show up daily until we had a mass shooting at my university, and then we could have them thrown off campus. But it took a mass shooting to get these people to calm themselves down. So my experience is very different. But I agree that in this bubble, it's like I love coming to cons because everyone here is like, I'm pro-science, I'm willing to listen, and you're skeptical. Because that's what's important about science. You have to say, really? What's your proof? Well, my Uncle Fred said. I don't care what your Uncle Fred said.
Healthy skepticism, that's a good thing. I would say yes, I have to side with this Kathy. Then it was science will solve everything. Better living through chemistry, plastics are the future.
Exactly.
The whole bit. But then we went through a lot of environmental issues, Chernobyl, Mile Island, EP spills, all the things that instead of just happening over in a laboratory, it's now happening to everybody. And so now the mantra seems to be science will kill us all. Climate engine, it's supported by unhealthy skepticism. Climate change is a hoax. It's just for environmental scientists to get funding, and they are clearly going to be rolling around as thousandaires after all this. Vaccines, power lines are causing leukemia, and it's also a scapegoat approach where it's clearly this sort of a thing. And so I would say this is also fairly unique to the U.S. right now. Other places, for example, India, I have connections there. Engineers and scientists are still held in high regard along with lawyers. Well, actually, lawyers are not held in that regard. But along with doctors. So, anyway.
Don't go too far.
Really just to echo some of what Kathy said. What I see is a real politicization of science, as in people are looking at science as how well does science fit in my particular worldview, my particular point of view, my particular political point of view, what I want to have happen. You tend to see things like the science about is the climate changing go along party lines, whichever side you see of that. and more along that line than actually, let's look and see what the evidence is saying. And now, just to go back 50 years ago, I think, just to put another side to all of that, I come from, my pedigree through getting my degrees and such is one of my undergraduate professors was, in fact, J. Robert Oppenheimer's grad student. He was also the person for whom J. Robert Oppenheimer was pulled in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He is a fellow by the name of Giovanni Rossi Lominitz, and you will actually run into him in some of the books, and is part of why Oppenheimer was pulled away from the labs. My graduate advisor was one of Edward Teller's people working at the labs. He actually was at the boys' school that became Los Alamos and recognized Drs. Smith and Jones, who were inspecting this piece of real estate to build the lab. And he and his buddies tried to decide whether they should blow the whistle on this, and decided they didn't want to spend the rest of their lives in jail. And so it didn't, and ended up getting degrees in physics and coming back and working in the labs. But part of the idea is you look back at the 1950s and you look back to the science fiction of the 1950s, there was certainly some skepticism about what direction science is going to take us. I mean, there were no shortage of cautionary tales about the directions that technology and science could go. And I think part of that was tied to this was the world of, on one hand, scientists built the atomic bomb that ended World War II, but on the other hand, they built the atomic bomb that could end all of us. And I think you see that reflected in the science fiction of the times. But I think it didn't go so much along, so much like today, where it's almost on kind of a partisan level.
Down the end?
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So I think there's a number of dimensions to this. One of them is, I think, a couple of people brought up the vaccination issue. In that one, we are victims of our own success. When the vaccines first came out, parents lined up around city blocks to get their kids vaccinated because they had all grown up seeing polio and seeing the measles and seeing those other diseases actually kill people. And the parents of today have all grown up in a world where none of those diseases existed. So they start to question, like, well, is this really a thing that I need to worry about? Because I've never seen anyone get any of these diseases. Maybe they aren't real. Maybe we're being lied to. Maybe there's too much mercury in the vaccines and it's causing autism. Or, it's easy to come up with these kinds of conspiracy theories when you've never seen the problem that these things are supposedly supposed to solve. And I also think that we're victims of we're victims of our success also in the sense that technology has advanced so quickly that I don't think that our society has had time for everyone to catch up. And our educational system certainly hasn't done a good job of catching everyone up. So we're caught in this situation where, to a lot of people, this science is not very different than magic. And it's funny, I work in a highly technical field, but even the program managers who plan my projects for me, they don't really understand what I do. And we're like 2 degrees of separation apart from each other, and I have to try to explain to them in very simplistic terms, like, I make interpipes. Data goes through the pipes. It makes things happen. And I imagine it's even worse for you scientists who are writing grant proposals and whatnot, trying to explain to politicians with zero science background what any of this stuff means. And unfortunately, because when things move from the realm of, oh, this is slightly more advanced technology that I just don't understand, to, oh, this is just magic and these people could be making things up for all I know, then you get this real disconnect between the communication that you have, and it becomes possible for them to start to become suspicious of what you're talking about.
It doesn't help that a lot of scientists sort of pushed the marketing aspect more than the science side, and burned some people along the way.
Actually, interesting factoid to flavor this discussion. In New Mexico, per the last survey I saw, the lowest rates of vaccination per county, Los Alamos. That's awkward.
That's usually where you'll find it, even in Europe, California, it's more highly educated and affluent areas. One thing I want to echo that was brought up was we are in an era of overload, the information explosion, and this is impacting science as well. I can't keep up with anything anymore other than a very narrow slice of a field and exactly what I need to solve the problem I'm working on right now, or to write the proposal I'm working on right now. And that didn't used to be quite the case. There was more, the fact that information can get out there faster, just like social media can get information out there faster. There's more information going out, and it's harder to vet it before it goes out, even on supposedly peer-reviewed, well, yeah, peer-reviewed articles and journals and that sort of thing. Moderate.
Okay, I'll hit. Just a quick point on the social media side of that is I was just going to say, it's like one of the things that you run into is if you're on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, you see this sort of barrage of articles, saying one thing or another about science, and even I, trying to keep track of this, it's like I can't keep track of everything that's happening in astronomy, much less everything that's happening in all of the other sciences. So, every now and again I'll have people like my friend Al over here who's recording this come to me and say, is this real? And really the only difference between Al and me as far as what I go and Google is I can look at it and say, well, that's a site I actually trust. And the source of that information is something that I trust and I can go back. And I always appreciate that when someone actually asks something like that. But I can see how you get this barrage of stuff. All of it looks like it could be totally legitimate, equally legitimate. Some of it is presented on very professional looking sites, and it all sounds very rational. And trying to kind of go through that and figure out what it is not altogether an easy problem.
Agreed. It really is a witch's brew of, there's a metaphor for you. So anyway, so you have the population going exponential in general, scientists, there are just more scientists than there have ever been. If you look at publication rates of peer-reviewed scientific journal papers, the actual gold standard reports that have been checked by 3 other experts in the field at least, the number of publications has gone exponential, such that the amount of scientific publications that have been published since I got my PhD, which was not that long ago, has actually literally doubled. So the amount of scientific research published since I got my PhD doubled the amount that was published in all of history before that. It's getting real hard to keep up on the literature, even just in your own field.
So if you stacked all the papers, the stack would be going faster than the speed of light. But nothing is
But
violated.
relativity is not violated
Because
because
no
no
information is transferred.
That's good. I think one thing to track here too is also the power dynamic. And that is who has the information. Everybody has it, but nobody can tell the difference, as we were saying over here. But it's also the power dynamic. Because if I understand something that you do not, then that gives me a certain power, and you want to take that power away because you are afraid. And we've had so much, and that's what's the difference between here and other countries. Science is not played as being something scary. Well, here it is, and it's not just a matter of, it's more of this power dynamic. I mean, that's one reason why Trump is in power, because there were a large group of people who voted out of fear, and they were bought into that fear. And so again, we have to talk about that power dynamic. I mean, you trust me to figure out when the solar eclipse is coming, but you don't trust me about the vaccines. Why? Well, you have information that makes me scared. And so that's also something to think about. Where is this fear dynamic? Because before, as in comparison to 50 years ago, people were not afraid of science because science was saving them, as you mentioned before. People were no longer dying of polio. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody had an uncle who was in an iron lung.
Wow, so there's a lot of topics being brought up on this panel. I don't know how to,
It's a broad topic.
yeah, it's a broad topic. Yeah, exactly, the same information overload. I mean, to David's point real quick, I recall that Carl Sagan talked about developing your own baloney detector as a way of evaluating the news and the science that you hear. And to address the point of the papers stacking up faster than the speed of light, there's also, which I would love to hear from the panelists about, a repeatability crisis in science, which is that a lot of papers are getting written and published in journals and supposedly peer-reviewed, but not actually repeated. And then when people go back years later to repeat those results, they come up with different results. And then the question becomes, how much are we actually really legitimately learning here? But all of the incentives in the scientific field are publish. You don't get the next grant, you don't get the tenure track position unless, well, how many things have you published lately? And, the person evaluating your application to your next PhD, post are not going to go repeat your studies. So as long as they see, oh, you were published in Nature and Science and all these other legitimate publications, I guess you're legit, so we'll hire you.
There's actually a fairly good level of self-policing, self-regulation that goes out. I've forgotten the name of the site because I haven't looked at it in a long time, but there's one site that keeps track of the number of distractions.
Haven't checked the site in a long time.
Well, it's like, honestly though, that's like gossip for scientists. It's like, ooh, what were they up to? Yeah, but self-policing. But the papers, the concept of getting papers and information out there is very important for academic or outside the fence kind of work at national laboratories. But in industry, I spent some time in industry, there it's like, yeah, you don't publish anything because you're going to be giving away our stuff, but you have to have something within the next 2 quarters.
Right.
And so that's another situation where we run into the society right now values money and wealth and puts that above science, which undervalues itself on a money scale, because obviously we do it, we love it, and we do it even if they didn't pay us.
Don't say that too loud.
Well, no.
You're already doing that.
Yeah, but they value knowledge over that, and it's really hard to put dollar sign figures. It's hard to keep score. It's a lot easier to keep score with salary.
Just a couple quick stories on repeatability, on the whole issue of repeatability of science, and one is just kind of a fun story of the history of astronomy in Kitt Peak. There was this group of astronomers that were using the Coude feed at Kitt Peak, which is a small, basically 1.5 meter telescope that's purely spectroscopic. And there was this group of astronomers that came up with this group of stars called sulfur flare stars. And what they were was stars that you would basically see this really strong line of sulfur happen in some spectra. And people would come back and they would observe them, and the same observers would come back and see these things really regularly on the same kind of periodicity. But then there were other observers that could come and try to observe these, and they would never see the sulfur flare in them. There were some that would see them on different periodicities. It finally turned out that what happened was they finally looked at who was observing, and it turned out that the people observing the sulfur flare stars were smoking astronomers. They were seeing the stripe of the match in the spectrograph. So this goes to show why repeatability is important, so that when you start doing a test, you can figure out what it is that's causing. And it goes to the point that really, scientists aren't people on ivory towers that feel like, egos might be bruised in something like this, but the important part is we figured out that no, this wasn't a stellar phenomenon. This was actually a human phenomenon. And then the other thing I was just going to mention real quick is, one of the, a lot of times, the way information is presented, we hear a lot in the media about discovery. And one of the things we don't hear a lot about is follow-up observation. I mean, that's actually a lot of what my day job, so to speak, is we have Kepler, we are soon to have TESS go online, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. These are all going to be, I'm sure if TESS is anything like Kepler, it's going to discover literally thousands of exoplanets. But the thing is the media makes a lot, NASA puts out its press releases on these exoplanets, but in fact, they're not really a discovery until someone else with a different telescope has gone and looked at it. And sometimes that layer of process, I think, gets lost in media.
Yep, we have, as a species, we have a strong novelty bias, and you're right, that rediscovery, that confirmation is key for exoplanets, for a lot of phenomena. For asteroids, you need to observe an asteroid and rediscover it repeatedly to make sure you know what its orbit looks like. And that can take a lot of work. And so, yeah, there are repeated papers published of, oh, okay, we got 5 more data points. Here's the ellipticity of this orbit, and now we know whether or not it's going to hit us. So that's really important stuff. Let's see, we got a question from the audience.
Well,
Nice and loud.
one comment that back when Walter Cronkite was reporting regarding the media, he would talk about the repeatability of the incident occurrence and how it was arrived at. Whereas now we have the 20-second soundbite, we can't talk about repeatability with the present talking heads.
Yeah, you're right. When journalism was a little bit longer format, you could talk about repeatability and accuracy. And nowadays, one thing that I'm finding as I'm talking with the media is there used to be specialist journalists who were specialists in scientific journalism. And not just scientific journalism, but they were medical journalists. They had degrees in biomedical fields, in public health or geology or meteorology, what have you. And very few of those people still have jobs because they're a little expensive, it turns out. And as newspapers and other journalism formats have been squeezed, that job has been given to non-specialists who don't necessarily have any background at all in science. And so that's become more and more challenging to try and communicate those ideas and to iterate with them if we even get the chance to iterate. A lot of times it's just you meet in a cafe at a conference, you have a conversation, and then whatever sunk in from their notes and their conversation is they're doing the best they can on 4 hours of sleep that night because they have to blog this, then whatever sunk in is what gets posted. And it's rough. Question in the back, nice and loud.
Just a brief comment.
Sir, no, behind you, sorry, you're next. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I have an unpleasant task at times of dealing with politicians a lot. And one of the things that I've found is that if I have a more limited paper rather than a peer-reviewed paper, but a more limited one that translates it into English, they tend to listen more than if I try to provide them with peer-reviewed papers. And I know that we have a system for doing peer-reviewed papers, but what I'd like to see is a system where scientists get together with writers. They do a more simplistic, translated thing from the peer-reviewed information so that there's something that we can provide to the people who fund things that they have a better understanding.
Yeah, okay,
So
so,
we're talking about EPOs.
oh, you want to talk about EPO? Okay, sure. First of all, thank you very much for your advocacy of science. I know that's rough work.
Yeah, it is, especially when they got a third grade reading.
Level, yeah. So just for those who do not hear, she's talking about having some methodology to translate the peer review into something that the average person can understand. So that was her question. And right now what NASA's doing to address that, what you're saying is that almost every major grant now requires that you have an EPO. EPO stands for Education and Public Outreach. You'll actually have an officer on your big grants. I had them on my big grants. So you actually have someone who then is the public face. So they go and talk to that person so that they can translate. Because if you're talking about someone who's a principal investigator, they're so busy, especially if there's something in the air, that they can't talk to you, they can't come back. You have a question for them. So I'm always encouraging authors, make sure you talk to the people who are doing the research. But do not be insulted if they can't talk to you today. Do not be insulted if they send you to their EPO officer. And if the EPO officer, if you have a question they can't answer, they will go. They will send you up. It's just a matter of be patient, because if they have something in the air, they literally don't have time to pee. So do be aware of that.
Okay, gentleman in the back and then lady in purple.
One comment, when I deal with people who don't have any science background, one of the things they forget is that science is evolving. And one of the things that they always talk about is, well, they said this was bad for us to eat, and now they're telling us it's good for us to eat. And I say, well, they got more information now, and they realize it is. But people think they hear something, and it's set in stone, and then it changes, and so they lose their trust in what we're telling them.
That's a tough one to deal with. Looping back to add to Kathy's comment on EPO, another thing that I've seen happening in the last 2 years with journals is they're having a second abstract. So a journal paper, the first paragraph at the top of the page, you have titles, your authors, and then what's called an abstract, which is a summary of findings. There are now 2 abstracts on most pages, one of which is a clear language abstract, where you take out all of the technical terms, all of the jargon where everyone in the field knows the precise definition, but maybe someone else who's not in the field doesn't. And because of papers going exponential now, I know the jargon for my field, but I might not know the jargon for David and Kathy's field, and they're very, very close. So this simple language abstract has an explanation of, okay, we did this thing, we found this, or we repeated this and got that. And so that's helping, but it's only in the last couple of years that that started happening. Let's see, lady in purple, and then we'll have, yeah, oh, I'm sorry, let's take comments from the panel first, and then we'll go to lady in purple.
Just really quickly, it's like, just to echo the fact that, yeah, we, even in Compete, we have an EPO, and Dr. Stephen Pompea, he's actually is an astronomer whose job is to translate these findings into plain English for people, for the press releases that go out. And then that was also kind of goes, you know, to your point, gentlemen, sir, is that it goes back to, you know, what I was trying to say about the repeatability. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost in the process, especially in our 20-second kind of soundbite version of science, is that, you know, you go and you study this further and you find out different nuances to a